In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you two ways to align text using a drop-down menu in the Essential Graphics panel. You may not need to use this every day, but I promise you if you work with templating and you need to move text around a screen with your template, this is something you're going to run into eventually. So normally you align text with the paragraph panel when you're working with text in After Effects. But there's a problem when you're trying to align text using the Essential Graphics panel. After Effects doesn't allow you to keyframe text alignment via the paragraph panel. That means you're not going to be able to easily control text alignment the way you would position or any other keyframeable thing. There are a couple ways to get around this problem when you're building an Essential Graphics template, and the simplest involves using the anchor point. If we switch alignment in the paragraph panel, we see that the anchor point lines up with what the paragraph panel is doing. And if you have a single line of text, this generally works. However, when you try to add multiple lines of text in the Essential Graphics panel, you run into some weird alignment issues. So here you can see that our whole text block is aligned to the right, no matter what we try to change in our Essential Graphics panel. If we try to change it to left or center, it's not going to change because in our paragraph panel, the text is aligned to the right. So before we get into a workaround for that multi-line problem, I want to show you how I use the anchor point to keyframe alignment for a single line. So in order to lock our text into position, we need to place the anchor point either at the beginning, middle, or end of the text line, and we want to be able to toggle through this placement in the Essential Graphics panel. So to do this, we're going to use source rect at time. Let's start by setting up our control layer and our drop-down menu in the Essential Graphics panel. I'm going to call this control. Go ahead and set it as a guide layer because I like that. So we're going to add a drop-down menu expression control to our layer. And we're going to call this align. Let's go ahead and define what we want our drop-down menu to say. So we have three items we want to do. One is aligned to the left, one is aligned center, and one is aligned right. So then we're going to take our align menu and drag it up to the Essential Graphics panel. Let's call this alignment. Alignment, yes, spelled it right. I'm going to go ahead and close this panel down. So this is where we get into source rect at time. And source rect at time is giving us the dimensions of this text box. And we can pull out several elements of that text box. So we can pull out the height of the box, the width of the box, the position of the top of the box, and the position of the left side of the text box. And because our text is going to change based on our Essential Graphics panel, I like to give my text layers just a generic text or text1 or main text kind of name. So we're going to go ahead and do that for this layer. I'm going into my anchor point. I'm going to enable expressions on my anchor point. And we're going to start by defining the box of our text, which is using source rect at time. So we'll begin with our first variable, and we're looking at this composition. Looking specifically at our own layer, we're going to call this text because that's the name of our layer. And we're getting our source rect at time for this layer. And we're going to pull out the height. So this layer's height. We're going to pull out the width. We're going to pull out the top, a.top, and we're going to pull out the left side, a.left. So one thing to remember here is just like position in our composition, After Effects looks at the top left of the box as starting from 0. So adding moves you down the y-axis or to the right on the x-axis. So if we add, we go down in the y, and if we add to the x, we go right. So define the bottom of our box. If we want the anchor point to sit at the bottom left of our box, we have to add the height of the box to the top position. And that would look something like this. So in our x-axis, we want it to stay all the way to the left because we're trying to get our anchor point to the left of the box. And in the y position, we want to put it at the bottom, so we're starting at the top, and then we're moving down the height of the box. And now that we know how that works, we can start building our expression that is going to allow us to toggle through the anchor point position based on our drop-down menu. So the way that we're going to cycle through this drop-down menu is with an if-else statement. So let's begin building that statement with what we already have here. So if, and now I have to twirl down my control layer, get down to my menu here, and I can pick whip. So if our drop-down menu is in the first option, what's going to happen? We want the x of our anchor point to be on the left, and we want the y of our anchor point to be the top plus the height. So now we can move on to our second alignment, which is our center alignment. And we do that by adding an else if. If our drop-down menu is in the second option, then we're going to do a little bit more math here. So we want to keep the y in the same position because we want it to be at the bottom. So let's start with that. Y equals top plus height. But we're going to do something different here with the x. And remember how we talked about moving the anchor point from the left to the right? We have to add. So for this, we're going to add the width. But we don't want it to go all the way to the end of the width. We want it to go halfway to the end of the width. So what we're going to do is start at the left. So we're starting our anchor point at the left. We're going to add the width of our text box, but we only want it to go halfway, so we're going to divide that by 2. And we're going to go into our last option, so if it's not in the first or second option, it must be in the third. So we're just going to say else. We're going to stick with the y as top plus height. And for our x, we don't want it to go halfway, we want it to go all the way across. So we're just going to stick with left plus width. And then we have to give it our xy coordinates. Because our y position for our anchor point is not changing through any of these options, we can actually go ahead and take this out and replace our final y coordinate with top plus height. And then we can simplify our expression and remove the y for each of these. So we have something that works pretty well here. The text looks good when we toggle through the drop-down menu. And if we want to change the text, and the way that we would do that would be to bring our source text up into the Essential Graphics panel. We'll call this main text. And if we want to change our text, it changes and the alignment changes with our drop-down menu no matter what is typed into it. But what happens if we want to add more lines? So it looks good on the right, but what happens when we change? Well, so now we see that our text is aligned to the right, but the anchor point of our text box is in the center. And because our paragraph is aligned right, no matter where we put our anchor point, the text is always going to be aligned right. And so you get this weird alignment problem. If you're just working in After Effects, you could potentially just swap things out, change it every time you change your anchor point, but man, that's really annoying. So What we're going to do is something a little crazy. And my solution for this is to nest this text comp into a pre-comp and then time remap it. And it seems complicated, and truthfully it is kind of a pain, but this is the best solution that I have found for this paragraph text problem. And as always, if you have a more elegant solution, please let me know in the comments, because I'd love to know. To show you how I do this, let's just delete everything that we just did in the anchor point. And I'm going to pre-compose this layer. And we'll just call this text pre-comp. And in our text pre-comp, let's call this first layer the guide. And we're going to duplicate it and call this aligned. We're going to get to the source text for both of our layers, and we're going to pick whip the source of the align. Let's make sure that we can see our layers. We're going to pick whip the source text of our align text to our guide text. And to make sure we have the correct one, I'm just going to delete this out of Essential Graphics, and I'm going to bring the source text of my guide text into the Essential Graphics panel, because this is where we are going to change our text. And let's hide this layer because we don't really need to see it anymore. So we're going to select our align text layer, and in the paragraph panel, I'm going to start by left aligning my text. I want to make sure that it's on screen, and we actually may need to change the scale of this guy to make sure that we're on screen the entire time. Give it a quick test. There we go. We're going to go back into our source text. We can see that our source text is pick whipped to our guide text layer, so everything that shows up in guide text is going to show up in align text as well. What I'm going to do is scrub to the first second and create a keyframe. I'm going to scrub to the second second, and I'm going to center align my text. Then I'm going to scrub to the third second, and I'm going to right align my text. So when I scrub through this composition, I should see the alignment change depending on the time. This is exactly what I want to see. And just to make sure everything is working, I'm going to change this a little bit. Perfect. Now we're done with our pre-comp layer. We're going to go back in our original text layer, and we're going to enable time remapping. I want to make sure that I can see my entire composition here because I want to delete this last keyframe because we don't really need it. I'm going to enable expressions on my time remapping, and I'm going to do a similar thing to what we did to the anchor point, an if-else statement that uses the option that is selected in that drop-down menu to determine what time we're looking at in our text pre-comp. To do that, first I'm going to twirl down make sure my control layer is twirled down so I can see that menu. I can easily pick whip over there. So let's begin. If our drop-down menu is on the first option, what do we want to happen? We want it to show us, let's open this up a little bit so we can see, 1 second. Otherwise, if our drop-down menu is in the second option, which is our center alignment, this is kind of annoying, we want to look at 2.5 seconds. And then finally, otherwise, just otherwise, we want to see 3.5 seconds. So just to reiterate what this is saying, if the drop-down menu is in the first option, we're looking at 1 second of this pre-comp. If it's in the second option, we're looking at second 2.5. Otherwise, we're looking at 3.5. Now let's click out and see what it gives us. And there you go. We have a beautiful text block that can be aligned based on the drop-down menu in our Essential Graphics panel.